Hello and welcome to Chatty AF, the anime feminist podcast. My name is Vrai Kaiser. I'm an editor and contributor for Anime Feminist. You can find me on Twitter at WriterVry, or for the other podcast I co-host at TrashPod.
Hi, I'm Dee Hogan, the managing editor at AniFem. I also run the anime blog The Josei Next Door, and you can find me on Twitter at Josei Next Door.
And I'm Peter Fobian. I'm an associates features editor at Crunchyroll and a contributor and editor at Anime Feminist.
This is our semi-holiday podcast, or it'll be released in the general holiday time. We're talking about the Satoshi Kon film Tokyo Godfathers, which was released in 2003. It did the festival circuit in the US roughly around 2005. It was directed by Satoshi Kon, who tragically passed away a few years ago at the age of 46, after only having completed 5 feature films and 1 TV series, Paranoia Agent. It was the screenplay was co-written by Keiko Nobumoto, who you may know as the creator of Wolf's Rain, the writer of the script for Cowboy Bebop the movie, and the scenario supervisor for the first Kingdom Hearts game. Tokyo Godfathers is Kon's penultimate film, and it is a remake of the 1948 John Wayne film, The Three Godfathers. It's better than that.
I've never seen that, and I did not realize it was a remake. So
I never heard of that either.
I learned something new today.
The original movie is very, it's very Western themed because John Wayne, and also, they get the baby from a tragically dying woman who was probably a harlot, So this film is a decided improvement upon that. The plot of Tokyo Godfathers, briefly for any listeners who might not be aware, is it takes place in Tokyo over about a week, where 3 homeless people find a baby in a dumpster or in a trash pile and decide to go on a quest to try and find the baby's mother. It's currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
You have to have a Strike subscription, though. It's not just on Prime.
Yeah, it sucks. It sucks.
You used to be able to do it with your Prime, but then
And that's only in the U.S. too, because I know Amelia wanted to join us on this one and she couldn't because it's not available in the U.K. at all. So it might be on Amazon if you're willing to dig through 2 paywalls, listeners.
Yeah,
Yay!
Satoshi Kon films are such a bummer because you can't get Perfect Blue anymore because Aronofsky bought the rights so he could have one shot in Requiem for a Dream, and Millennium Actress, who the fuck knows where that went, and Tokyo Godfathers didn't get picked up by an anime company, so its license fell through, and you can still get Paprika though.
I have the other 3 on my shelf, so I guess I'm doing okay in that regards. I don't actually own Tokyo Godfathers. It's apparently the only major Satoshi Kon film.
Yeah, I did mean to ask before we got started, if you guys are familiar with Kon's previous work.
Just his general filmography.
Yeah, and his sort of whole artistic deal, because he is one of the few directors who I think you could make a case for as auteur.
Well, I have not seen Paranoia Agent, to my shame. It's on one of my huge backlog titles that I just haven't gotten around to yet. But I have seen all of his films. I actually think Tokyo Godfathers is one of my favorite. As much as I love his surrealist rapid cuts and kind of I don't know what to call it, kind of temporal uncertainty with the way he kind of you're never sure whether or not what you're seeing is real, which is very common in his films. This one is kind of grounded and just sort of relies on a lot of character acting and more snappy cuts and stuff. So I definitely appreciate everything else he does, but I think this was kind of unique in that I don't think there's any point in the movie where you're not sure if what you're seeing is real, and it all feels very grounded.
It's interesting to me because on the one hand, it is everything is happening, but it still feels very much like a Kon film because it's a fairy tale. If you took a drink every time a miraculous coincidence happened in this film, you would die.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many Kyokos. It almost becomes a joke, the number of Kyokos they meet on this trip. So it does have these kind of Kon elements of existing, not quite in the real world, but I do agree that it's a lot more grounded than his other works, which I've seen everything but Millennium Actress, and Millennium Actress has been sitting on my DVD shelf for like 8 years, and I've just not gotten. I like to watch movies with other people, and I just never get around to saying to a friend, "Hey, let's watch Millennium Actress together."
Fair and legit.
So, but I've seen all of his other works multiple times. So yeah, I'm pretty familiar with Kon and his kind of hyper realistic art style, which is really fun to see because I don't think you see that a lot in anime, at least the stuff that makes it to the US. His characters tend to have more realistic body types, which is fun and refreshing. And he kind of does he tends to have kind of his art style is like, again, I said hyper realistic because there's almost a kind of grotesquerie to it sometimes. Like the faces have so many creases and contortions to them, as opposed to a lot of anime, which is very like, kind of smooth skinned, idealized, pretty looking.
Yeah, he likes him a fisheye lens.
Yeah. Well, and it does sort of get into the kind of Junji Ito-esque where you kind of like close up on anatomy to the point where it does become kind of gross to look at. Or where shapes, like normal features start distorting to the point that they become frightening. Yeah,
it's like the characters in this movie are very broad in some senses, but still grounded by those proportions. And I'm in love with how many like curvy, like stocky women are in this film, and
yeah, I noticed that too.
It's very good.
It's refreshing for sure to see more, just more different body types in an animated film in general, not even just like out of Japan, like in general. To see that is nice.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of because like Paranoia Agent is so very much about post-World War II kawaii culture and like a criticism of that. So I wonder if that sensibility is kind of throughout all of his work.
I would imagine his art style is partly in response to that. I also think that his films tend to be kind of interested in looking at some ugliness in the world and then kind of trying to draw something beautiful or valid or worthwhile out of it, which I think you can definitely see in this film. So, but his art style kind of plays into that that just overall tone, I think, as well.
Okay, I would say some of the most like intense online arguments I've had are in interpreting the works of Kon, because they're primarily Perfect Blue, whether or not it's actually supposed to be a criticism of idol culture. But I think given the history of his works, I mean, even Tokyo Godfathers itself, it is definitely putting a spotlight on some social and cultural issues in Japan. It feels very just kind of thematic for his overall work, and I don't think you could interpret it as him not trying to do something like that, given that every single one of his works seems to be doing something like that.
Yeah,
he said it's not about that, but Romero also said that Night of the Living Dead wasn't about racism, and okay. But
well, and it could be one of those things where maybe it's not specifically about the idol industry, but there's definitely an element of I mean, it's clearly looking at the way men take ownership over women's bodies, especially those in the public space. Does that make sense? Like, that's very much a part of Perfect Blue. Sorry, this is kind of a tangent for listeners. They came on expecting Tokyo Godfathers, and we're like, let's talk about all the Kon movies.
I just love
because
Satoshi.
They're good.
You gave me an opportunity to talk about Satoshi Kon, who I mourn the death of every day.
Yeah, watching Tokyo Godfathers made me kind of sad because I was like, oh, this is I haven't seen this movie in like probably, I think I saw it in high school, and I don't think I've seen it. I haven't seen it since. So rewatching it, and it's the first time in a little while I've rewatched a Kon film, and I was like, aw, I don't get anything else. He's not going to do anything more, and it just made me miss the hell out of him.
We might get
the robot film's never going to happen. The robot film's never going to happen.
I don't know. Well, the person who's trying to make it happen is Masayo Maruyama, and and I don't think anyone cares about anime more than that man.
That is a good point. He's the MAPPA studio head, Vrai, who
and M2 now
pushed through. We saw him at this corner of the world.
Gotcha.
In this corner of the world, yeah.
He's the one who's also trying to get Satoshi Kon's comic Opus. I don't know if I said manga there. Made into a TV series. I'll be curious to see who they get direct that, or how that is even possible given what the manga's about.
Isn't that unfinished? Isn't all of Kon's manga unfinished?
Well, I've only read two, which were translated to English. There was Opus and Seraphim.
I read
Some
Seraphim,
absurd number of ways.
and I did not know Seraphim was not finished, and I was very upset when I got to the end of that volume.
Oh.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah.
It was Mamoru Oshii and Kon making a manga together, which is just insane.
Yeah, no, but I wanted to bring us back because you brought up the social commentary in Kon's work that I really wanted to talk about that in this film because it struck me as really unique that, a lot of this film is about found families, and I want to get into a little bit more of the dynamics specifically with Hana later, but I was really interested in the fact that Miyuki's story is very much about the father making amends more than her, which strikes me as quite unique in anime and in, parent-child reconciliation stories in general. There's, this idea that her pain is worthwhile and she's not just a bratty kid who should know better and who should apologize, which, yes, that is one part of it. She did a bad, but
I was going to say she did stab him because her cat was gone. That's
fucked up. But I don't know. I find it interesting that she is a three-dimensional character who we are supposed to sympathize with as far as when she talks about, I didn't feel like my parents loved me in my house and I ran away because of that. It's not meant to be histrionic and she just didn't appreciate all the work her parents do for her.
Yeah, you get the feeling that there was some sort of build up to the cat event too. That wasn't my cat's gone, oh my dad must have sold it or something like that. There was obviously something going on in that household, although they don't have time in the movie to really explore it. They definitely imply it, and I feel like they do a good job of showing that there was more than that singular scene to what happened between her and her family, but also that her family wanted her back and felt regretful about what had happened.
Yeah, I think. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Violet.
Oh no! Well, I'm interested in this film that's not just about parents should, or not that's not just children should value and respect their parents, but also parents owe things and should value and respect their children.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think a lot of the film is about forgiveness specifically for all of the characters in a variant. There is a sense of them wanting somebody else to kind of forgive them for a mistake that happened in the past, and so I think it is really nice to see in this film that Miyuki feels like she did something completely unforgivable, and of course she can't go home because she did stab her dad, which is a big deal.
It is a big deal. Let me not downplay that.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to downplay the fact that she stabbed her father because her cat was gone. So somewhat understandably, she thinks I did something, completely unforgivable, and there's no way I can go home. And it turns out that despite doing a pretty terrible thing, her parents are more worried about her than angry at her. They want her to come home and they want to make sure she's safe. So,
yeah. And I think that plays into the basically the plot of the movie with them trying to find the Kyoko's parents, and just saying that the child deserves a good upbringing and deserves to be with its family, and which is why they have so much. What was the woman's name? Sachiko.
Yeah.
Highlighting how horrible what she did was by kidnapping the child, but also that the reasons that she did it was because she wanted her own family. I think her child died after birth, or
it seems the impression I get is that the child died was stillborn.
That was what I thought too. It was probably stillborn. And yeah, I think there's kind of I'm not sure if I know 100% what the movie is going for with this line of thought, but it's definitely playing with the idea of kind of the romance of blood relations and family. Because it is important, but I think the film really kind of has several characters who see it as the most important thing in the world. And I think in some ways the film shows that can be kind of destructive because Sachiko sort of, one of the reasons she sort of becomes so unstable at the end and ends up stealing a child is because of this desire for this blood family. And if I just have this kid, it'll fix everything that's wrong in my relationship with my husband. And then you also see this found family that ends up kind of saving the day and coming together. And so I think because there is still blood relatives that we see as more positive portrayals, like Miyuki's parents wanting her to come home, and Gin's daughter being, she wanted to see him, and she wanted to like good Lord, give me a second. I swear I know how to talk. She wanted that relationship back in her life. So I think the film is kind of playing, I guess, a little bit with the idea of like both have value and one isn't necessarily better than the other, because I think it balances the two very well.
Yeah, it seems to walk this very fine line of it wants to stress that family is very important, but the nature, like where the family comes from, isn't. So, and like specifically in this element of diffusing that idea that, oh, the blood relative is like your blood family is always the most important and the best for you.
Well, yeah, I think they kind of that comes in at the very end, because I think it's Hana who says some line about there's no way a foster family can replace a real one, or something like that, which is kind of like I remember hearing that line. I was like, I don't know about that. I mean, definitely if you're kidnapped, but like you could certainly be as happy. But then in the end, they become Kyoko's godparents, or the family wants them to become godparents because what they did was so important.
The line, as I
child.
remember it, is that when they first get the baby, Hana, it talks about how a blood family isn't always better. Sometimes a foster family is better. And clearly, she found a home at like the club where she was working. Like, she calls the club owner mom, and that's clearly her family.
Yeah.
Well, but it was I think either on the bridge or on the rooftop, Hana delivers like the exact opposite line. But I think it's just kind of a way to make Sachiko feel bad, because at that point Hana thinks that she abandoned her child. But yeah, in the end, obviously the parents want them to become the godparents. So I think that is kind of like the stance the movie takes at the end, which is someone who is not a blood relative can be just as important to you. And in their relationship with each other, I'd say that they all became basically family members with one another as well.
I wish they'd made that a little more clear in Hana's story, because I think a lot of her story is about she very much has this kind of romance of the blood relatives, because she never had any of her own. So she goes on this quest to kind of try to understand why a parent would leave their child, basically. And she has lines like we've been talking about, where it's like, well, a child should be with their actual mother. That's the most important thing. And then I feel like at the end, I think the film does a good job of showing why that's not necessarily the case, but I do kind of wish Hana had more. I feel like Hana's story is a little more up in the air than Gin's or Miyuki's at the end, and I wish it was a little bit clearer that she would maybe go back to that club and spend more time with the family that she had there, or acknowledge the fact that that was her family and they didn't have to be blood relatives. That made me a little sad.
Yeah, it's Hana's story is interesting to me because it's like there's a lot in this film that's like the melding of Eastern and Western culture, specifically with Hana, who is she's a trans woman. She works in a drag club, and she is also this cultural voice who she knows the sound of music, and she's read Dostoevsky, and she
recites, and she's
a Christian,
writes haiku on the spot,
right? And then there's Hana seems to fairly earnestly believe in a Christian God, but she also goes with Miyuki to pray at the temple at New Year's, and I just find that sort of cultural meshing really interesting in this film.
Well, that last one I don't think is too unusual for Japanese people. I think they were pretty kind of a frustrating culture for Christians to try to proselytize to, because they readily accepted a Christian God but continued to pray to at Shinto and Buddhist temples as well, which the way that they the idea of a Christian God precludes the others, but they kind of continue to do that. That's more of a cultural thing. But
I was also going to ask, I noticed while I was watching the movie that the word homeless is a loan word in Japanese. And I don't know much about the history of that, but it kind of caught my ear.
I can't help you with that. I'm
Alas.
sorry.
Sorry. I'm also curious. Maybe one of our commenters could elaborate, who has some knowledge of the Japanese language. That is unusual. You figure that it wouldn't take until they had encountered the English language to already have a sufficient identifier for that sort of thing.
It's I was also I was also reminded that this film has a much, I think, better scene involving, borderline psychotic teenagers beat up homeless people than certain other anime that have aired this season.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I remember like that scene when it happened. I like almost had like a stress response because I'd completely forgotten about it, and just how evil those kids seem, especially because of the way that they just transition. They're just like, oh, our girlfriend's called, let's go back on a date, and then they just immediately drop what they're doing as if the act they were committing was in no way significant to them.
Well, I mean, I probably don't know enough to comment on it, but that feels very deliberate in like a film that's very much about social stratification of what families matter and who matters. Like, I don't think Kon put this film in just because we needed a histrionic scene about teenagers, especially after it's so sympathetic to Miyuki. Like, I think he's very purposefully trying to say something about who gets valued.
Yeah. Well, apparently that's a real thing that happens quite frequently in Tokyo.
It's fucked up.
Really? Wow. Yeah, that is messed up.
I talked to someone who lived in Tokyo for a couple of years, and they have a name for. I think they literally just call them cleanup crews.
Wow.
And it's something. Yeah. So I think it's a real issue in Japan. I don't know. The movie was made.
It was 2003.
It was 2003. So like 15 years ago.
So,
it's been a while.
Yeah, maybe there's been progress since then, but at the time, yes.
Yeah,
that scene always strikes me as like a little over the top, because it's I guess it's very hard to imagine, but I mean it sounds like it's actually a problem. So
unmitigated human cruelty.
Yeah. For fun.
Before we go off Hana, though, I did want to ask: is there ever an explanation for why she becomes homeless? Because I got that she worked in the club and then she married that guy and he died. But I never really got the transition from being married to going back out on the street rather than going back to the club, or I don't even know why Hana became homeless after that.
The impression. Go on.
When she's in the club talking to the owner who she calls mom. I guess I'll just call the character Mom, which sounds a little odd.
Mom.
I think her character's name in the credits, I believe, is Mom.
Is Mom.
So,
when she's talking to Mom, they do that flashback of Hana getting angry at a client, and the sense you get is that she was like very embarrassed about like kind of attacking this dude, and she felt like she couldn't come back. She felt like they wouldn't want her because of her temper, essentially. And then Mom basically says, "No, of course you definitely could have come back. It was no big deal."
Yeah, and like with Miyuki in terms of things that are a little bit implied but not touched upon, I get the sense that Hana probably couldn't get a job as trans woman who presents female 100% of the time in Tokyo. She probably couldn't get a normal salary worker job, and she did.
No, I would assume that was implied in that as well. So like that kind of like the drag club job was probably one of the few places that would hire, and then she felt like she couldn't go back. So probably Ken was just the one working, and then when he died, then no money was coming in functionally, and then she felt like she didn't have anywhere else she could go, and she ended up homeless because of that. Was the sense I got.
Okay,
yeah,
that's interesting. So with all three of them, they kind of have this thing about not believing that they are worthy of forgiveness for what they've done. And then when each of them encounters the individuals who they thought would never forgive them, they're forgiven.
I don't want to... Oh, go ahead.
I don't know how... I'm on the fence about how I feel about that plot point, because I like that they kind of avoid the more sort of like maudlin, sappy tragedies, like when Gin's first telling his story about how his daughter died and his wife left him, and I like that they kind of avoid that, but at the same time, there's a little bit of a sense that the characters are homeless because of their own misunderstandings. Does that make sense? And I think that's a bit of a mistake, because I think a lot of homeless people really don't have someplace to go.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the story kind of plays up this of oh no, they all actually do have homes and families, and it's just a matter of like realizing that they're worthy of asking for forgiveness, basically. I think that's a good storyline. I like that theme, but there's just that one extra level of it in terms of like implications it makes towards people who are homeless that bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, legit, because like we've talked about, it does have these quieter implications of social critique that it doesn't really go into too much.
Mm-hmm. I think it undermines itself a little bit with the way it handled with the fact that every story has this forgiveness undercurrent that again sort of ends up being like, well, if they just realized this thing about these people in their lives, they would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the sentiment. I like the sentiment of everybody has somebody who cares for them, and it's a matter of realizing that yourself. I think that's a really good sentiment. But again, I worry that it maybe leaves slightly the wrong impression that the movie wanted to make about the groups of people it was doing a very good job, I think, of humanizing that tend to be ignored or shunned or considered like trash, as the characters refer to themselves occasionally in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's, by the way, one of the funniest scenes ever. The I don't think I'll fit scene. I die. It's very, very sad.
With the trash can. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, there's a couple of there's some good bursts of humor in this film.
Yeah, that was a very 2017 joke, which he was way ahead of his time.
Right? Yeah.
I
was like, oh look, it's Annie Twitter.
But what I did wanted to talk. I did want to say one more thing about Hana is that I end up with this sort of fascination with her character because she's probably one of the best depictions of trans women in anime that I can think of. Period. She's kind of a broadly comic character in the same way that the entire cast is, and like because she is situated in this sort of heightened reality, it doesn't these elements of her character that could be a little stereotypical. You know, she wants to have a family, and she's a heterosexual trans woman, and you know, she works in a drag club, but they feel honest, like, growths of who she is as a person and where she's come from, rather than this is an Okama stereotype. Here we go. And just so it, you know, it's one of those things that then becomes sad because I think she works and she's great, but like you talked about that that element of did this. Some things aren't solved at the end of this movie, and you maybe implied some things or didn't imply some things you didn't mean to, movie. It's like, especially with Hana, she can go back to the club and make her own friends, but that's not going to get her housing. And her family register is probably still under her dead name, that kind of stuff. It makes me sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I don't. I got the feeling that they were sort of intentionally, because you get the scene where they're sleeping at the club, and I think they had some of the workers just basically sleeping there, right? So I think I don't know if this is them being lazy or maybe trying to do something intentional where it's just like, no, this is just how it is for people like that in Tokyo, where all the people at the club kind of are living, I don't like in semi-homelessness, I guess is what it would be. Because they need somebody like the proprietors of that club to give them a place to stay and a place to make income, since they won't be accepted in most places.
Yeah. The other big element that we kind of haven't touched yet on is the language scene with the Latin American characters.
Yeah.
Which
I was real concerned because I haven't seen this film in a long time. So when when I was like, whoa, a brown person in anime, when I saw the waiter, and then he immediately shoots somebody and takes somebody hostage, I'm like, oh no,
right.
oh no, oh no, oh no.
The whole scene is a whole roller coaster.
It really is. Thankfully, it kind of spins it, and I think does the same thing where I think Kon very much doesn't want to write like perfect idealistic characters, and I appreciate that about him. So all of his characters, you know, have flaws and aren't going to be what you would consider like perfect representation,
right?
If that makes sense. But I think he's also very focused on everyone has moments of sympathy or humanity, like, and I think he does a good job of once the kid gets back to his home with Miyuki, it's basically like, yeah, no, here, take care of them. I don't want them hurt. Help this baby.
Right.
And then they kind of are able to bond over familial ties and some kind of common ground, even though they don't speak the same language.
Right. Well, and even the introduction scene of oh God, he's a waiter. Oh God, he's an assassin. He is shooting at the Yakuza.
He is.
Yeah.
No, that is very true.
You could like. There's no going like, why do you think he shot that guy? You're pretty sure it has something to do with gang stuff, or that guy screwing him over personally, or even though you never get like a single coherent word out of the character.
And I.
Well, you do. They're just all in Spanish, and it sounds like pretty good Spanish.
Yeah.
To my untrained ear. I could pick up a little bit of what they were saying, but I am not fluent, so.
I had high school Spanish, and like I have no idea. I do really like that scene with his girlfriend,
sister. I was guessing sister, but yeah, possibly girlfriend.
Well, yeah, because like she mentions briefly that I think they were together, but he's not the father of the baby. I thought I caught that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's I just because like as somebody who's been abroad and had that moment, like it's very true to life in that moment of oh we both know a word, we know a shared word, and we point. Like it's really great. It's a nice little scene there again that I think does a good job of when the character first shows up, you're like, oh cool, they're using an immigrant character as a criminal. Great, that's awesome. And then it kind of spins it and is like, well, there's a lot more here too, and here's another community that kind of gets ignored or like pushed into the margins of society. And so it adds to that sense of trying to shine a light on those communities, and then also show the humanity present that I think a lot of people don't necessarily see when they think of like homeless people or immigrants. And this is still topical today. Yep.
So
again, 2017 anime that are perhaps about how you kids and millennials don't appreciate the previous generation, and hey, that's kind of fucked up. I'm sorry.
Are we quietly throwing shade at Inuyashiki? Is that what's happening?
Oh, I mean, I can do it more loudly if you'd like.
I was picking up on that.
Because you threw shade at Inuyashiki earlier, and we didn't actually mention that's what we were talking about. We've only all seen like one episode, but
I thought you guys. I thought you were talking about just sort of the nationalist trend right now. But
that works too. Yeah, no, that's what I was talking about.
I'm down for either.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about in broad strokes. But then earlier when we were talking about kids beating up homeless people, that was a plot point in Inuyashiki that was played so over the top that it was absurd. So
I could. Yeah,
anyway,
it bums
sorry,
me out.
Tangent.
It bums me out because Kon is so good at thoughtful like social critique, and it really depresses me that there is no legal way for people to watch Paranoia Agent, because hot damn that series. Like Tokyo Godfathers here is a much softer, more optimistic version of a lot of his other work, but it's still
Yeah,
those scenes are like really, really funny too. Like I remember, I had completely forgotten the opening conversation between Gin and Hana, where they're talking about the Virgin Mary, and Hana goes, "Oh, maybe it was just a gay guy who magically got pregnant," and I was like, "Oh man," because they said it was like a miracle conception.
The eating for two brick joke is fucking genius.
Yeah, that was so good.
Yeah, I'm eating
and
for
they
two.
And they bring that back later too.
When the lady shows up and she's like, "It's a miracle," because she sees Hana with the baby. That was so good.
This is a very good and funny film that I watch every Christmas, and I love it a lot. I have feelings.
Aw, I didn't know it was part of your Christmas tradition.
It is, yeah. It's like it.
That's nice.
It definitely soft pedals a few things, but it's so nice and human and and warm to people who Christmas movies normally don't give a fuck about or try to pretty up.
Yeah.
Like I feel like Kon's,
or turn it into a very special episode.
Yeah. I feel like Kon's art style is like integral to the fact that it wants to humanize these people, like these various marginalized populations, but not sanitize, I guess, is maybe a word. Not in terms of dirty, but
no, I think that
yeah.
I think that makes sense in that they're still messy human beings with like all three of them have, flaws and good points too, and So again, it's very much a look at like humanizing them as humanizing people who tend to get dehumanized, I think, in a lot of media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Gein's the character that I kind of know least what to do with because I feel like he's a commentary on like traditional Japanese views of masculinity that I don't really have as much of an inroad in on. There we go, words.
I think that's part of it, but I also think that if Hana is a trans woman and Miyuki is a teenager, and these are groups that tend to get kind of shoved into the margins or don't have a lot of power. I think Gin does have a mental illness. He has addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And
For
I
sure.
think that a lot of his character is nobody is dealing with the fact that he has addictions, including himself. Like he spends most of the movie drunk. He's an alcoholic. And we know he had a gambling problem, which he might still have, but he doesn't have a lot of money necessarily. So we don't necessarily see that. Although I think he does buy a lottery ticket at one point.
He does,
so,
and then they win the lottery at the end with like.
No. He got that
Oh,
from
that's
the
right.
dead guy. That was in the dead guy's pouch.
Oh yeah, that's right. But so that was, to me, I think that's the connection he has to the overall story, is that kind of unwillingness to deal with or talk about mental illness. With Gin's character.
That's maybe the part where the movie, like when you're talking about how it wants to be like these people's problems are their own problems. The fact that it kind of lets it lie with Gin mentioning that, well, I'm the one who racked up the debts. It's not the fault of the guy who preyed on my addictions. Like, and then that's kind of where that storyline rests, which is kind of a bummer.
Gambling is so accessible in Japan that I think that may have been sort of focusing on that, because like it's not like the U.S. where it's like there's certain places that where it's legal. It is everywhere. In every major city, there's like entire streets that are just like pachinko parlors and stuff like that. So I think that may have been what it was trying to do. Personally, I don't know. I almost felt disappointed because I think it'd been a while for both me and Dee, and we'd forgotten a lot of stuff. I kind of liked his initial like lie about why he was homeless as well, but I think that's just more from the perspective of an American, maybe, because it's like you're always one medical bill away from being completely ruined and out on the street.
Yeah.
Which resonated with me very strongly. And I also just kind of like the idea that it may not be, because in that situation, it's like, what else could he have possibly done to try to save his entire life, and he still ended up out on the street, showing that like maybe for some people it's not really their fault or a choice.
Yeah.
They just get ruined. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think it was one of those stories that had so many elements of like typical tragedy to it that a part of me is glad that they sort of subverted that. Because I think you do run it's this fine line where you run the risk of the story feeling like a very special episode, or it feeling like, well, it's his own fault that he's here. And I don't think that's the case either, because again, I think that he had addictions that were not, properly addressed and dealt with. But I think Gin is the hardest character to sympathize with in the film. And I had to kind of fight to remind myself that he was also, kind of dealing with his own sort of social, how do I word this? A part of his life was also looked down upon by society at large, I guess is how I would say that.
Yeah. And he was definitely, if you owe money to the Yakuza rather than some pachinko parlor, you were getting into some serious gambling, I think. Or it was like horse races, right?
Yeah, I think he was. I think it was racing that he was gambling on. So
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think both stories have kind of a different merit to them narratively, and they resonated with me in different ways. That's why I was kind of saying, like, I don't know which story I would have preferred in the end of the day, but both of them kind of had their own like kind of valuable look at what can make someone end up in a situation.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Do we want to talk about Sachiko, like, briefly?
Probably should.
Yeah, we should talk about Sachiko.
She just, I don't know, her character, she doesn't really have an arc, because she's like, she's such an absent, deliberately absent figure for so much of the film, and then I think the movie is really interesting when she's not around, like the gossiping housewife scene, which is very much like, well, we heard about this domestic abuse, and we all know something or other about. None of us did anything about it, mind, but we all heard something.
Of course.
But
yeah.
But then at the end, the ultimate because this is a very feel goody movie, the only conclusion it can come to for her is, we'll start over with my husband in this clearly toxic relation. No, don't do this. No, bad.
Well,
yeah, because before the kid, it seemed like things weren't working out for them.
Yeah.
So,
well, and
the kid won't fix it.
Doesn't Sachiko kind of reject that too? Because he shouts that from the balcony, and then she decides that she's going to jump anyway. Doesn't she?
Yeah.
So she basically says, "I'll see." It's not quite "I'll see you in hell." It's just like, "I'll go first, and then we can meet together," or something like that. So she accepts the premise just in the afterlife rather than in the living world.
And I think to a point, Sachiko is also another part of another social group that tends to get sort of ignored or not discussed or kind of put in the margins, which is first of all, she's a woman, so there is that. She does get married. She's in like these financial straits. The people around her are aware of the fact that it's an unhealthy relationship that appears to have been abusive to some extent. And again, nobody does anything about it. And so I think Sachiko is also in a situation where she's trapped and she's kind of on the edge of like, well, if I left, I would. You don't get the sense that Sachiko has any other family outside of this guy. So there's the sense that, if she leaves him, then she would probably be out on the street with the rest of our protagonists.
Yeah, and like whatever the state of host clubs at large in Japan, one gets the feeling that this specific one was probably kind of exploitative, like that there's the implication that she was pushed into having plastic surgery and that kind of thing.
That's true. There are references.
Run by Yakuza.
That's true. There are references specifically in this movie to the fact that the job she had previously was probably not a good one for her. So I have some sympathy for her, even though she does some pretty heinous things in the film. And they don't really like everybody else. It feels gets kind of like a redemption moment or a forgiveness moment. And you don't really get that with Sachiko. Like her
not really.
Shitty boyfriend has his speech, but it doesn't like win her over. She's not like, okay, I'll come down. And then we don't really see her again. So we don't really know what happens with Sachiko. There's a lot of lack of clarity at the end of the movie as to like where everyone's going to go. So it's kind of, you have to draw your own lines, I guess.
Yeah. Like I guess her redemption moment is like deciding to give Kyoko back.
Yeah, even Miyuki's reuniting with her father, that was just like they started the scene and then the credits rolled. So the end of the movie was it kind of felt, I don't want to say abrupt, but it kind of like intentionally left a lot of things just hanging
I guess
off in
you could
nowhere.
say that like it's broad, like it's potentially hopeful for all of them. Like Gin won the lottery. I kind of get the implication.
And reunited with his daughter, who seems willing to have a relationship with him again, which he had wanted.
Right. I get the impression Hana's going to stay with Gin, which, girl, aim higher.
I know. I agree.
But at least she's like back in contact with her family at the club, and Miyuki like is at least talking with her dad so they can try to work that out. And Sachiko at least had the moment of clarity that she shouldn't steal a baby and this isn't going to make her happy. So like it doesn't solve any of their social ills, but at least for these individual characters that they have like a door to something ahead of them.
It's like somewhat optimistic.
Yeah,
and
it is.
Given it almost feels like they keep talking about how Kyoko's a miracle baby, which I sort of think is funny because it's sort of like there's all these like narrow versions of disaster, but they've also encountered a bunch of disasters and narrowly averted them. So it's hard to say whether Kyoko's good luck or bad luck, and they just happen to narrowly escape.
I mean, it's very
times.
Blues Brothers. Like we're on a mission from God.
Yeah. Yeah, so it could, like all of in that context, it almost feels like this was just sort of like Kyoko was kind of this gift that brought everybody into this crazy situation that ended up with them reconciling parts of their past. So because of that almost like supernatural drive that pushed them into that situation, you kind of feel like the outcome's going to be good. It has an optimistic feeling at the end, I think.
It does, definitely.
Yeah.
And I guess it would have been it would be very out of character for Kon in particular to end the movie with like an epilogue where it's like everybody is happy now and things are tied into a neat bow, and I don't think I would necessarily like that either.
Yeah.
So
I do want to say, in regards to the Yakuza, the Yakuza guys, I felt like it even tried to humanize them a little bit, because, I mean, they run into the first one who had let his car slide over him, and then he was genuinely grateful and invited them to his wedding, or his daughter's wedding. Afterward. And he basically just said, join the party, here's some money, if you ever need a favor, call me, please. And then the son, or the son-in-law, I guess he was going to be, who was kind of made out to be an asshole, despite the fact that he ran that club, it didn't seem like he had made any efforts to retain Sachiko when she said she wanted to leave with her new husband, which I think is notable. And he also took the bullet for his father. So while there was definitely some bad stuff involved, I think it showed that they're people, too, who are capable of charity. I don't think he tried to, I think Kon took deliberate steps not to demonize any of the characters.
Yeah,
even the guys who would normally be the bad guys, who probably were mostly bad, you kind of saw their better sides as well.
Yeah, except I don't know, Sachiko's husband's kind of awful.
Yeah, he's kind of a piece of shit.
There's a lot of there's not a lot of redemption there. At the very end, he decides to make it work with her, but that's not that doesn't mean anything.
That's meaningless.
I was gonna say lots of shitty boyfriends and abusers say that too, and it doesn't mean anything.
I got the implication that maybe she was the one physically abusing him, because that was...
Oh, you're right. Yes, he was like kind of taking all her money, but yeah, in that conversation they had, it's implied that he was the one who had bruises, not her.
So this is like a mutually abusive situation that neither of them should be in.
Yeah, it's really bad and unhealthy for both of them. So
it's bad.
So don't get back together, please.
Please don't do this.
Please don't.
Both of you do something else. I also wanted to talk about the shit translation a little bit before we go.
Yeah, I figured we should touch on the subtitles. They sure made some decisions around Hana, didn't they? They sure made some decisions.
Sure fucking did. Like, not just first of all, if you're watching this on Amazon, not only is the old translation from 2005, I believe, is when it was, still the translation. That translation is hard-coded to the video. And then, like, Amazon's translation can play over top of it if you've turned the closed captioning on. But no. There is no turning off the subtitles on this one, which is just, like, the most 2005 thing I've ever seen. Like, holy shit. So, more generally, for folks who don't know, the subtitles in this movie around Hana are bad. There are a couple choices they make. Miyuki refers to Hana as Abasan, auntie, and the subtitles translate that as uncle for reasons. And then also we've talked about Hana's temper in the film. Which is specifically triggered by people calling her Gigi. So
the term they keep using is kusajiji, which literally would be like shitty old man,
right? Which makes sense.
But you could,
which makes sense. Is like her response is always like, "Shit, I'll take," but then the correct translation would be like, "But man, I won't."
Yeah. Yeah, it's the Gigi part that pisses her off, and the subtitles decide to say like "shit I'll take," but like it's like "eat shit you old fart," I think is how they translate it, and she's like "fart I won't take," and it's like that doesn't make any sense. Like the point is that she's angry when people don't acknowledge the gender that she is. Like that's the point of that line, and losing that in the translation, I think loses a part of the social commentary Kon is sort of brushing up against in that situation too. Is like, hey, you should respect this person's gender identity. That would be a good idea.
Well, and like with like Miyuki versus Jin, it feels Gin, it feels important too, because like Miyuki calls her Kusojiji like once at the very start of the film, and then from there on calls her either Obasan or Hana-san.
She eventually switches to Hana-san, here's what I think what the translator was maybe trying to do was to show Miyuki like gradually accepting and developing like that kind of emotional, affectionate bond with Hana that she does develop because Hana takes care of her, which is like really sweet.
Right. But it's
because they do translate Hana-san as Miss Hana.
Right.
So at a certain point, the subtitles do go, okay, so the characters are respecting Hana's gender at this point. But it's still a weird choice to me. It's like, why not just have her go from calling her Auntie Bag to Miss Hana? Like that shows a shift in respect.
Right,
like,
exactly. It's still a shift in respect, but it starts at the baseline of even this bratty teenager knows that this woman is a woman. Like, which feels like important in contrast to Gin, who spends a lot of the movie calling Hana an Okama, which is like, and boy, did the translators make some choices there.
The translators, they translate Okama in a variety of ways, and Okama is a difficult word. I mean, what was I going to say? Hana refers to herself as an Okama because it's one of those words that in Japanese is very context dependent on whether or not it's not inherently a slur. Right. I guess is what I should say. It's kind of a complicated term.
Like, and I don't know Japanese as well as you do, but from just like a lot of taking in a lot of media that uses that term prominently, the impression I get from it is that it's kind of one of those words that can be deprecating, but can also be used by queer people as like a self-deprecating thing. So like something like homo or fairy or those kinds of things that are an insult, but you can also, use self-referentially. So like that makes sense to me. Translating it with faggot, that's don't. Movie. What the fuck? That creates a really, really nasty sense that I don't want to root for these people to come together as a family if they're like with those kinds of words in his mouth.
And I don't know. The Okama is again it's kind of a difficult word, also because the meaning and kind of intent of it has shifted a lot over the years. There's a big long author's note at the end of the first volume of Princess Jellyfish that goes into the fact that like even when Higashimura first started writing that series in like 2005 to now, the word's meaning has shifted slightly. So there's a difficulty in finding like exact one-to-one translations for it. But I don't think it ever really has the same vitriol as I can't even say it.
Yeah, the F slur.
I will call it the F word, and I don't mean fuck, because that word I don't mind saying. I don't think it ever has
seems
that
to be most similar to queer, right? Just in the way that it's also been sort of repossessed by the culture.
Yeah, and it's kind of a catch-all. It tends to be. I mean, I think sometimes you can translate it as cross-dresser. I think you could get away with drag queen in certain situations. It's very context dependent, and again, it sort of depends on who's saying it. But I don't think it ever holds the same sort of inherent violence that the F slur does. So the fact that they used it in that, I was like, Gin's being a jerk here, but he's not being this much of a jerk.
He was not using that word. Yeah.
And it makes Gin, because I remember watching this as a kid. I liked it, but it didn't stick with me. I think the way it did with for you, Vrai. But I remember very distinctly not liking Gin, and part of it was because of that. And I was like, wow, you're a terrible person. And that was a lot of that is a subtitling decision, which is not
a
ideal.
Real shame. Yeah, and it's like, well, and it doesn't make sense that Hana would stay with him either, because like she blames herself, but she has that point of pride about herself that I think if he were using those kind of if he were referring to her with that level of vitriol, she'd go or beat the shit out of him, which he would.
I think you're probably right.
Hana was one of the only ones that wasn't regularly fighting. I think Miyuki and Gin were always beating the shit out of each other. But Hana would say don't hurt each other too bad.
But she would tell Gin off when he deserved it, though. Like she
for sure, yeah.
She told him off multiple times when he was being awful.
Good.
So
like, damn,
it's
Hana
good.
can
I really
throw
like
shade
Hana.
like nobody's business. It's really good.
He's very, very good at it. Yeah,
I do. Like a moment of silence for the opening scene of the movie where Gin is a piece of shit to Miyuki, though. Like gropes.
Oh God,
gropes
yeah,
boobs.
yeah. That was that. It was between the F slur and him grabbing her chest. I was like, wow, I really don't like you, and that feeling never quite goes away. And I think to a point the movie is harder on him than it is on the others, because he also lies about his backstory to gain more sympathy and things like that. So,
Yeah, he's still redeemable, but he's definitely rougher and kind of worse than either of them. and like Hana is literally the hero of the movie at a certain point where she drifts down.
I love that one.
Oh my god, it's so good.
Yeah,
I think Gen's the one who needs a moment of silence because I think Hana literally killed him in front of his own daughter.
It's so good. God, she's the best.
No, and I love that she did get to be the hero at the end and save the kid and kind of that was a really sweet moment. And then God himself smiled down upon Hana and Kyoko and brought them to safety.
It's such
you noticed Hana was not at all surprised by that happening either.
No, at that point, it's like, this is par for the course.
Yes, no, this week.
Yeah, celestially floating down to the ground, smiling serenely. That was so good. An interesting choice.
It's so nice. This movie is not perfect, but it's so nice, and I always get kind of wibbly at the end, and it gives me feelings. I like these characters. Yeah, it's a real shame about them subtitles, I wonder how much of it is, like I mentioned at the top, this wasn't brought over by anybody in the what we'd think of as the anime industry. It did the film circuit instead, like the film festival circuit. So, like.
And I think in those sorts of stories, from a more Western perspective, they might expect people to be more ugly and harsh just because of our own perception of homeless people, I think.
What's up, transphobia?
So it might have been...
And classism.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, so. Yeah, I don't want to make too many assumptions about where the translator was coming from. But yeah, it is unfortunate, and it would be nice if all the Kon movies could get relicensed and maybe some updated subs here and there and then get re-released, because they're all very good and people should have easy access to them.
Mm-hmm.
Need a box set already.
Get on that, Crunchyroll.
I own like 85% of Kon's discography, and like I will give you my money again.
I would love to have his movies on Blu-ray. I think that'd be lovely.
Yes.
And I don't own Tokyo Godfathers yet, and now I feel like I should, because rewatching it, I was like, oh, this is nice. So.
Yes. So I'd say this is a hearty recommendation from all of us. Like, if you can get a hold of it, I actually think at least if you are in Region 1, DVDs are super cheap. Like, I think they're still printed.
Yeah, I think they're. Are they still printed? I was going to say, even if they're out of print, I think there were enough of them that you could get a hold of a copy without too much trouble.
If you vamp for a second, I can check Amazon. I'm very invested in people watching this film. I don't think you understand.
Telling our audience to check it out. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's not a perfect movie, but I think it does a lot of things very well. And I think especially for the again, it's one of those where it was made in 2003, and I think sometimes it's hard to remember how much progress in certain areas and not progress in others that societies have made since then. In terms of some of these issues, and so the fact that Kon in 2003 was making a movie that is very human and sympathetic towards groups of people that tended to be looked down upon, I think is something worth applauding, even if there are some flaws within the film itself.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the movie is DVDs are still being pressed. It looks like it's like $15 for a DVD, or you can get it $12 used on Amazon. Which it's well worth it. It looks like some other regions might have even gotten a Blu-ray. Not us, though. We're not special.
Aw. I thought Blu-rays were region-free. I may have made that up.
Depends.
Okay. This isn't... I don't know how relevant this is to our podcast, but I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Yeah, we're just wanting people to watch a very good movie, because I think we can pretty much... We'll recommend... I think it's a blanket recommation. Yeah. Anything Satoshi Kon has ever touched.
Yeah, that's legit.
Period. Yeah. And this one is probably his most real, down to earth, kind of sub-focused.
Yeah.
Sub-focused, that's weird. Focused work that isn't him going completely out there with crazy imagery.
Well, it's
probably a good starter film because it is pretty acceptable in terms of the surrealism. He's got there's one dream sequence and then a couple of little fun touches in terms of the animation getting kind of smeary. But overall, it's pretty grounded.
Yeah, it's also one of his most universally age appropriate, along with Millennium Actress, because his dark shit gets dark.
That's a very good point. That is true. Yeah, Perfect Blue and Paprika both have some content warnings tacked onto them for sure.
Paranoia Agent too. But this one, like, pretty much anybody can watch it. It's real good. It's real good. It's full of feelings. Okay. Well, thank you so much to you guys for joining me to talk about this movie. And thank you, listeners.
Thanks for suggesting it.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. And if you liked this podcast, you can find more of us on Patreon at patreon.com/animefeminist. Every little bit does help. We really appreciate whatever little bit you can throw our way. It helps fund the website, and we really appreciate all of you. If you liked this content, you can find more of Chatty AF on SoundCloud. You can read more of our contributors at animefeminist.com. Find us on Twitter at twitter.com/animefeminist, on Facebook at facebook.com/animefem.
The podcast is also on iTunes and Stitcher.
That's right.
Lots of options.
Lots of options. And if you can leave us a rating or review, that's great. It helps people find us. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time, AniFam.
Happy holidays!
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.